I was looking for a nickname. A friend called me Willem, and then when it was time to actually have a name on a program or something, it felt silly to go back to my birth name. So I felt like Willem. I used Willem.
For decades, Willem Dafoe has mastered a strange trick. He can walk onto a screen, say almost nothing, and still make audiences uncomfortable. His face alone can suggest danger, madness, or something far worse. As Norman Osborn, he became one of the most recognizable villains in superhero cinema. As Bobby Peru, he created a character audiences almost wanted to look away from. And as countless other characters, he somehow found ways to become almost unrecognizable. But here is the strange part. People who have worked with Dafoe often describe someone completely different: quiet, curious, generous, and intensely focused on the work rather than celebrity. That contrast may be the most fascinating thing about his career. Behind the wild eyes and unsettling laugh is an actor who has spent decades refusing to become predictable. And his journey started in a place far removed from Hollywood glamour. Because before the villains, the Oscars, and the superhero masks, Dafoe was simply an experimental theater performer trying to find his own way. Willem Dafoe did not enter the entertainment world with the kind of carefully designed identity that many performers create today. Born Willem James Dafoe in 1955, he grew up in Wisconsin in a large family, surrounded by siblings and a father who worked in medicine. His unusual name would eventually become part of his screen identity, but even that name has an interesting history. Willem was reportedly a nickname that stuck, while the family surname carried European roots that made it distinctive from the beginning. More importantly, Dafoe never seemed interested in becoming a conventional Hollywood personality. He was drawn towards strange performances, experimental spaces, and artists who treated acting less like a business and more like an investigation. That mindset would eventually pull him away from the safe route most aspiring actors followed. Instead of chasing fame immediately, he chased experiences that made him uncomfortable. And that decision would shape almost everything that came afterward. The traditional path to becoming a successful actor was never enough for Dafoe. He briefly studied acting, but quickly discovered that the structured classroom environment was not where he wanted to spend his time. He became fascinated by experimental theater and performers who treated the stage almost like a laboratory. That curiosity eventually led him toward New York, where the downtown theater scene offered something Hollywood could not: freedom to fail. Dafoe became involved with the Wooster Group, an experimental theater company that would remain a major part of his life for decades. There, performance wasn't simply about memorizing lines and pretending to be someone else. It could involve movement, sound, technology, improvisation, and physical transformation. Dafoe absorbed that philosophy deeply. He has often described an actor as something like a color on an artist's canvas, someone who helps bring another person's vision to life. That attitude explains why his filmography became so unpredictable. He wasn't searching for the biggest role, he was searching for the next challenge. But his first encounter with Hollywood would be anything but a smooth beginning. Dafoe's earliest major film experience came with Heaven's Gate, one of Hollywood's most infamous productions. But his involvement in the movie was hardly the glamorous beginning an actor might imagine. He was cast in a small role connected to the film's unusual background characters, and according to stories Dafoe has told over the years, he even found himself in an awkward situation involving a supposed ability to speak Dutch. He had prepared by learning lines phonetically, hoping to get through the audition. Then came the moment when director Michael Cimino actually asked him to perform in Dutch. Suddenly, the trick was exposed. Dafoe's time on the production ended almost as quickly as it had started. It would have been easy for a young actor to see that experience as a disaster. Instead, it became an absurd story from the earliest chapter of a career that would eventually become filled with them. And fortunately for Dafoe, His next opportunity would be far more important. Not long after that early setback, Dafoe found himself attached to The Loveless, a gritty film centered around bikers. There was just one problem. His character needed to ride a motorcycle, and Dafoe didn't actually know how. Instead of admitting that immediately, the young actor reportedly claimed he could handle one. That decision quickly became a problem when he encountered a real 1950s Harley-Davidson. He had to learn fast. Dafoe studied motorcycle information and practiced until he could convincingly handle the machine. The story perfectly captures something that would become a pattern throughout his career. Dafoe repeatedly throwing himself into situations where failure was a real possibility, then figuring out how to survive the challenge. He wasn't interested in looking polished from the beginning. He was willing to look foolish while learning. That willingness would soon matter enormously, because his next major role would send him into a completely different world, one involving military training, dangerous conditions, and a film that would change his career forever. Then came the role that pushed Dafoe into another league. Oliver Stone's Platoon wasn't filmed like a comfortable Hollywood production. The cast was put through intense military-style preparation in the Philippines, where the actors experienced exhausting drills designed to make them understand the physical reality of soldiers in combat. Dafoe embraced the process, and the experience helped create the raw atmosphere that made the movie feel so different from a typical war film. But production itself became unpredictable when political unrest erupted around them, forcing the filmmakers to temporarily stop. Dafoe later recalled how surreal the situation became, with the cast caught in an environment where real events were unfolding outside the movie. His performance as Sergeant Elias eventually became one of the defining moments of his career. And if you're enjoying this deeper look at the man behind the characters, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there's much more coming. The strange thing is, Dafoe's most unforgettable moment in the film almost feels like a painting brought to life, and that scene would change how Hollywood viewed him. Elias's final moments in Platoon became an image that audiences would remember long after the credits rolled. Dafoe runs through the battlefield, wounded and desperate, before eventually collapsing, with his arms raised toward the sky. The image became iconic, but what made it powerful wasn't simply the choreography. Dafoe played the moment with a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and almost spiritual resignation. The performance earned him his first Academy Award nomination and announced that this wasn't just another character actor passing through Hollywood. Dafoe could carry enormous emotional weight without turning every moment into obvious theatrics. Suddenly, filmmakers had another reason to call him. But instead of using the recognition to chase safer roles, Dafoe moved toward one of the most controversial projects of his career. Martin Scorsese had spent years trying to bring The Last Temptation of Christ to the screen, and when Dafoe was offered the central role, he accepted a challenge that would place him at the center of an international storm. Playing Jesus was not simply another acting assignment for Dafoe. The Last Temptation of Christ asked him to portray a deeply human version of a figure millions of people regarded as sacred. Scorsese wanted the story to explore doubt, fear, temptation, and the emotional conflict behind the familiar image. Dafoe approached the role seriously, and filming took place in Morocco, far removed from the distractions of modern Hollywood. The production itself became intense, with the actors immersed in the strange atmosphere of the location and the weight of what they were attempting. Then the controversy exploded. Religious groups strongly objected to the movie's interpretation, and the backlash became impossible to ignore. Dafoe later recalled encounters with people who recognized him and immediately connected him to the controversy. Yet he didn't seem interested in turning the situation into a personal battle. For him, the movie was an artistic experiment about faith and humanity. But his next memorable character would move in the opposite direction entirely, away from spiritual seriousness and straight into pure cinematic weirdness. David Lynch has a talent for making actors discover things about characters they never imagined. Dafoe experienced that firsthand when he played Bobby Peru in Wild at Heart. On paper, the character was already disturbing, but Lynch wasn't satisfied with simply giving Dafoe a strange costume and sending him in front of the camera. He wanted the character's physical appearance to become part of the performance. That meant giving Dafoe a set of grotesque false teeth that dramatically altered the way his mouth moved. Suddenly, Dafoe couldn't rely on his normal expressions. The awkward dentures forced him into a completely different physical rhythm. His smile became unsettling. His speech changed. Even the way he held his face became part of the character. Instead of fighting the limitation, Dafoe used it as a creative tool. Bobby Peru became one of those characters people remembered even when they wished they hadn't, and that ability to transform limitations into advantages would become one of Dafoe's greatest strengths. Dafoe's career also took a bizarre turn with The Boondock Saints, a movie that seemed destined to disappear before audiences discovered it. The production had a troubled path, and its theatrical release was far smaller than the hype surrounding it might have suggested. But Dafoe saw something interesting in the project. As Detective Paul Smecker, he played an eccentric investigator whose personality was almost impossible to ignore. The character's strange energy gave Dafoe another opportunity to step outside the boundaries of a conventional Hollywood performance. Then something unexpected happened. The movie found an audience after its initial release and gradually became a cult phenomenon through word of mouth and home video. Fans became so devoted that Dafoe could reportedly recognize them almost immediately when they approached him. It was another reminder that a movie doesn't always need a massive opening weekend to survive. Sometimes, an audience discovers it years later and refuses to let it disappear. But Dafoe was about to enter a role that would make him almost impossible to forget. By the time Shadow of the Vampire arrived, Dafoe had already proven he could disappear inside almost any character. But this role demanded something different. He played Max Schreck, the mysterious actor portraying Count Orlok in a fictionalized story about the making of Nosferatu. The joke at the center of the film was simple and bizarre. What if Schreck wasn't acting like a vampire because he actually was one? Dafoe embraced the idea completely. The makeup process was exhausting, reportedly requiring hours of work before filming, and constant maintenance throughout production. Yet, instead of treating the transformation as a burden, he used it as freedom. The exaggerated face, teeth, posture, and movements gave him permission to behave in ways that would have seemed ridiculous without the makeup. The result earned him another Academy Award nomination and showed once again that Dafoe could turn physical transformation into a serious acting tool. But nothing in his career had prepared audiences for the character waiting just around the corner. When Sam Raimi's Spider-Man began taking shape, Dafoe saw something in Norman Osborn that others initially dismissed. Superhero movies were not yet the dominant force they would become, and some people around him apparently questioned why an established dramatic actor would want to play a comic book villain. Dafoe didn't share that concern. He actively pursued the part and even arranged to audition while he was filming in Europe. His screen test was reportedly filmed in a hotel room, proving just how determined he was to get involved. What attracted him wasn't simply the Goblin costume. It was Norman's psychological split. Beneath the businessman was a man slowly losing control of himself. Raimi wanted that conflict to feel almost like a modern version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dafoe understood immediately that the real challenge wasn't playing a monster. It was convincing viewers that a human being was trapped underneath one. Then came the scene that demonstrated exactly why Dafoe had been chosen. Norman stands before a mirror, arguing with the Green Goblin as though another person is occupying the room. But there was no second actor standing opposite him. Dafoe had to perform both sides of the conversation, while maintaining the illusion through timing, movement, and subtle changes in his voice. One moment he was Norman. Then his posture shifted. His expression changed. His voice dropped. Suddenly the goblin seemed to be answering him. The sequence could easily have become exaggerated or unintentionally funny, but Dafoe played the psychological conflict seriously. He treated every movement as a clue about which personality was taking control. The result became one of the most memorable scenes in the film. It also revealed something important about his technique. He doesn't necessarily need elaborate dialogue to transform. Sometimes a tiny change in posture is enough. And there was an even stranger piece of superhero history connected to his name. Years before he became Norman Osborn, Dafoe had been considered for another legendary comic book villain. Tim Burton's Batman reportedly explored him as a possible choice for the Joker, partly because his distinctive appearance already carried some of the unsettling qualities associated with the character. The role ultimately went elsewhere, becoming one of Jack Nicholson's most famous performances. But the connection became fascinating in hindsight. Dafoe never needed the Joker to establish himself as a great villain. Instead, he eventually found a completely different character who allowed him to combine menace with tragedy. The Green Goblin became one of his signature roles, and his facial expressions became so closely associated with the character that even the mask could never completely hide them. In fact, when audiences later saw him return to the role, the reaction proved something remarkable. Decades had passed, but the character still worked. Yet Dafoe's career was never really about staying inside one kind of movie. After Spider-Man, Dafoe could easily have spent the rest of his career playing variations of intimidating villains. Hollywood often rewards actors by giving them more of whatever made them famous. Dafoe went the other way. He continued jumping between completely different filmmakers, genres, accents, personalities, and physical transformations. One project could demand brutal intensity, while the next might require quiet restraint. That unpredictability became part of his identity. He wasn't trying to protect a carefully polished image. He seemed more interested in discovering what a director wanted, and then finding a way into that world. That philosophy explains why his filmography feels so unusual, compared with many actors of his generation. There are no easy boxes for him. Villain, saint, soldier, vampire, artist, motel manager, sailor. He kept changing before audiences had time to decide exactly who he was. And one of his most fascinating creative relationships would prove just how comfortable he was inside someone else's strange cinematic universe. Dafoe's relationship with Wes Anderson began almost casually, but it eventually became one of the most distinctive partnerships of his career. After seeing Anderson's work and meeting him through mutual connections, Dafoe eventually received an unexpected invitation to appear in The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. His role was small, but he embraced the strange world immediately. Anderson's films demanded precision, unusual timing, and performances that could feel almost theatrical. Dafoe fit naturally into that environment. What started as one collaboration became several more, including the Grand Budapest Hotel, Isle of Dogs, The French Dispatch, and Asteroid City. Each character looked and behaved differently, yet Dafoe never seemed out of place. That flexibility became one of his greatest advantages. But another filmmaker would push him into territory that was far less playful. Working with Lars von Trier on Antichrist was a completely different experience. The film explored grief, guilt, fear, and psychological collapse through extremely disturbing imagery and emotionally demanding performances. Dafoe accepted the material without trying to make it comfortable. His approach was to commit fully to the world the filmmaker had created, even when the subject matter became difficult. The result was one of the most intense films in his career. Yet Dafoe has spoken positively about experiences like this because they force actors away from safe choices. He wasn't interested in simply repeating the same successful performance. He wanted projects that could challenge his instincts, and that instinct would soon lead him toward a character who couldn't have been further removed from the terrifying image many audiences had built around him. In The Florida Project, Dafoe played Bobby Hicks, a motel manager surrounded by poverty, chaos, and children living on the edge of uncertainty. There was no monstrous laugh, elaborate costume, or supernatural transformation. Instead, the performance depended on restraint. Bobby had to appear exhausted but compassionate, frustrated but protective. Dafoe worked alongside young performers, including non-professional actors, which created an unusually natural atmosphere. His performance earned another Academy Award nomination and reminded audiences that his greatest strength wasn't simply intimidation. He could make a quiet gesture carry as much weight as a dramatic speech. The role also revealed how much emotion he could communicate without dominating the screen. And then came another transformation, this time into one of history's most recognizable artists. Playing Vincent van Gogh in At Eternity's Gate required Dafoe to approach the role from inside the artist's creative process. Instead of simply holding a brush for the camera, he actually learned how to paint enough to make the work feel authentic. Director Julian Schnabel, himself a painter, brought a personal understanding of Van Gogh's world to the production. Dafoe immersed himself in the physical habits, movements, and emotional isolation associated with the artist. The performance earned him another Oscar nomination, making it clear that his transformation wasn't limited to villains. He could disappear into historical figures just as convincingly. Yet despite all these acclaimed performances, one question continued following him. How could an actor with so many celebrated roles still have no Oscar win? Dafoe has received 4 Academy Award nominations across his career, spanning dramatically different performances. Platoon introduced him to the Academy. Shadow of the Vampire showed his ability to transform physically. The Florida Project highlighted his subtle emotional range. At Eternity's Gate demonstrated his ability to inhabit a historical artist. Each nomination represented a completely different version of the same actor. Yet none resulted in a victory. For many fans, that has become one of Hollywood's great acting mysteries. Awards may measure certain moments, but Dafoe's career is difficult to reduce to one performance. He has built something arguably more valuable, a reputation for taking risks when safer choices were available. And his most demanding performance may still have been waiting for him. The brutal, bizarre world of The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse gave Dafoe another chance to prove that age had done nothing to weaken his appetite for difficult roles. Opposite Robert Pattinson, he played Thomas Wake, an aging lighthouse keeper whose relationship with his younger companion slowly turns into a psychological battle. The dialogue was intentionally old-fashioned, demanding a performance that could feel theatrical without becoming artificial. Dafoe embraced every strange moment, from roaring into storms to delivering bizarre monologues. The film's cramped atmosphere made the experience even more intense. It was uncomfortable, physical, and unpredictable, and exactly the kind of project he seemed to enjoy. By this point, Dafoe had become almost impossible to categorize. He could play a villain, a religious figure, a historical artist, a frightened man, or an exhausted father, without making audiences feel like they were watching the same actor underneath. That may be his greatest achievement. Instead of protecting a recognizable image, he kept destroying it. Every new role became another experiment. Away from the camera, the contrast is striking. Dafoe has long been described by collaborators as thoughtful, disciplined, and remarkably approachable. He doesn't appear obsessed with celebrity or with maintaining a larger-than-life persona. Instead, he talks about acting as collaboration. The director has a vision, and his job is to help bring it alive. That humility may explain why so many respected filmmakers continue returning to him. After decades in the business, Dafoe still approaches acting with the curiosity of someone starting out. He has continued accepting unusual projects instead of settling into one comfortable formula. That restlessness is important. The moment an actor stops being curious, performances can become predictable. Dafoe seems determined not to let that happen. He keeps looking for the next filmmaker, the next strange character, and the next opportunity to surprise himself. Perhaps that is the biggest mystery surrounding Willem Dafoe. Audiences remember the scream, the grin, the goblin, the vampire, and the terrifying faces. But underneath all of those characters is an actor who built his career by staying curious rather than chasing comfort. 4 Oscar nominations without a win may be frustrating, but his legacy goes far beyond a trophy. He became the rare performer who could frighten millions on screen, while earning admiration from the people working beside him. And after nearly 5 decades, the most interesting question may be simple: what could Willem Dafoe possibly become next?